Our next guest is a college football analyst for ESPN, starting center on BYU's 1984 national championship team. And it's a pleasure to welcome Trevor Matich to the Wise Guys. And Trevor, as we bring you in on the Zoom.
Great to see you guys as well. I appreciate you having me on.
It seems appropriate to have all these media days in July because it blends nicely with all the hot air outside and then all the hot air rhetoric from all these teams. The SEC's having their shot at it this week, Big 12 last week. Do you learn anything from all this July chatter in football?
No, I don't learn a thing. The only thing you really learn is if somebody comes in more confident than you think they ought to be, it makes you wonder, okay, well, what do they know? And if somebody comes in with just a tremendous amount of swagger, it makes you wonder, okay, can they back this up? Especially if they're coming in with a lot of swagger, just sort of out of the blue without the year before having done a lot of stuff. So other than that, whenever I've gone to media days, and I didn't go to Big 12 media days this year, but I usually, people speaking from the podium, the press conferences with the players, I don't usually learn much from that. I wait until the coaches and players get done with all that media availability, and then I'll go talk to them.
Yeah.
And that's when I learn the most.
Jeff is on the live stream tonight from Fillmore, Utah. Richard joining us for Trevor Matich's interview from Panama. So we're across the world tonight.
Trevor, I'm still getting used to saying P4 instead of P5, right? Because of the Pac-12 going away. And right now, obviously, as one, I would say conference has fallen. The rights and the chatter of who is the number one conference or who the best conference is going like crazy, especially right now in July. When it comes to the P4 conferences, where would you rank each of them at 1 through 4, with number 1 being best?
Big SEC and then Big 10. And then ACC has a chance to be that third team just because of what they have at the top. If Florida State puts it all together, or if Clemson puts it all together, they have a legitimate chance to win a national championship, or at least compete deep into the playoffs. The Big 12 has a lot of outstanding teams as well at the top. Oklahoma State played for the Big 12 championship last year, and they have a ton of production coming back. They're one of the teams to beat. There are others, though. And people have said that, and smart people have said that they could name up to 9 Big 12 teams that could win the conference. The question is, outside of being incredibly fun to watch and a tremendous conference championship race, what then would the Big 12 conference champion and maybe the number 2, what would they be able to do in a 12-team playoff? And right now it's all purely speculation. But if I were to speculate, I would think at the top, the ACC has to have an edge until proven otherwise.
Big 12 has 16 teams. When it's all said and done, do you think they add Florida State and Clemson, or is this just more hot air in July?
I think Florida State and Clemson have made it clear that they want out of the ACC, or they want big changes in the way the ACC compensates its teams. In other words, they would like a disproportionate share of revenue. And I don't know that going to the Big 12 would change anything for them unless the Big 12 is ready to have that kind of a compensation as well. In other words, that the conference champion, the teams that make the playoffs, they get a disproportionate amount of money. And if the Big 12 is ready to offer that kind of thing, then I think teams in the ACC might want to listen. Now, we all know that the ACC, the big problem for leaving is the grant of rights through, I think it's 2036.
Yeah.
So there are huge contractual and financial disincentives to be able to leave before then. But smart lawyers are trying to figure out how to do it. And really, it's financial, because when you think of it this way, you look at the SEC and the Big 10 and the multi-tens of millions of dollars that they're bringing in. I mean, just huge amounts of money for each school. And then the ACC and Big 12 are quite a ways down from that. And so at one point I looked at this about a year ago. So these numbers might have changed. But about a year ago, I think the SEC was making about $30 million per school more than the ACC. And so if we just use that as an example without saying that's exactly what it was, in 10 years, that's $300 million difference per school.
Crazy.
And the courts have already opened the door to the potential for schools to directly pay players. Well, if you're at a school that over the course of 10 years has an extra $300 million that your competitor school in a different conference doesn't have, then you're going to find the best players and the best transfers are going to be going to those schools and those conferences, meaning the Big Ten and the SEC, unless the others can find a way to keep up. So really, this is looking long-term down the road, because right now, ACC, they could win it all. The Big 12, they could go deep into the playoffs, and with a great run, they could win it all. But 10 years from now, what are you going to have when the best recruits and transfers are going to where they'll get paid the most, and there's that big of a disparity in the money coming in? So I'm just talking about right now what it looks like it's going to happen. So many things can change, but it's looking like the SEC and the Big Ten have a chance to separate here.
Yeah, it feels like it.
What's interesting to me when I saw this rumor, or I guess we call it a rumor, is that there's a lot of attention to the Big 12. You would think, just from a perception standpoint and obviously a money standpoint, that those two schools would be more interested in the SEC or maybe the Big Ten. So, what reasons do you think of why those two teams would, choose a Big 12, that it'd be more appealing than going to the other two mega conferences?
Well, you're talking about Florida State and Clemson,
right? Yep.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be. I think that it would be more stability and more money to get locked into the Big Ten or the SEC. That's just the way it is. It's no. I don't want to disparage the Big 12, but it's kind of a lateral move to go from the ACC to the Big 12 right now in the current structure. And all these things could change. But from a standpoint of, the teams that enter the Big Ten, the teams that enter the SEC, especially from the Pac-12, those teams went from uncertainty to guaranteed long-term wealth and stability. Taking it to a different place, SMU won the American Athletic Conference last year, group of five conference. Very good conference. But they wanted to join the ACC so badly that SMU said that they would not take a share of ACC revenue for, I think it's like 10 years. They said, no problem. We'll get donations to make up the difference. We just want in. Why would you want that? You would want that because of the long-term stability. You don't want to be like Washington State and Oregon State, two storied and outstanding programs, athletic programs, that right now don't really have a home, and you don't want to be left like that. And so if you could go to the SEC or the Big Ten, right now that's where the best possibility for stability and income lie. However, there are all kinds of ways that the ACC and the Big 12 could join forces in some ways. You may see some ACC teams leave and go to the Big 12. You could see that. The Big 12 right now is there's no better run conference than the Big 12. Brett Yormark is doing a fantastic job, and that's not to disparage any other commissioner. But the Big 12 went from a conference that seemed like it was going to go away and the Pac-12 would survive to being now one of the Power Four conferences with a bright, bright future. It's just that if you compare that future to the Big 10 or the SEC, there's work to do for the Big 12. Even so, it's incredibly well run. So, schools need to look at it from a long-term standpoint, and they need stability first, and then they need cash flow as well in order to compete.
Well, you think about when BYU is an independent, to be in the Big 12 is stability with a capital S on everything, from scheduling to future to bowl games, and the SMU, of course, the ACC. And when you've got the top dogs over there, Florida State and Clemson, unhappy and wanting out, but the bigger dogs are like they got a full kennel, right? Big Ten and SEC are like, look, there's only so much money. We've already got 16 and 18 teams. And I think that's where Yormark is like, hey, we're right over here. We got a spot. We can make some room. BYU national champion and ESPN college football analyst Trevor Matich is on the Wise Guys, presented by Brady Plus. Some members of the Big 12 media picked BYU 13th, largely because of the uncertainty at quarterback. What do you think about that? And if Jake Retzlaff or Gary Bohannon can hold their own, how high could the Cougars finish? What do you think, Trevor?
They could finish in the top half.
Yeah.
They could make a bowl game. They could have a great run in the Big 12 this year. Keep in mind that when Utah went from the Mountain West to, I think it was Mountain West at the time,
Yeah.
to the Pac-12, it took them a while. It took them years to be able to recruit to the point that they had not just the high-end talent, but more than that, had the depth to be able to withstand the attrition of the Pac-12. They built it up. The administration was patient, and they got to the point to where they're one of the best teams in the Pac-12. Well, the teams entering the Big 12 from Group of Five status or thereabouts, those teams need to understand that, and the fan bases need to understand that it's a similar thing. Look at what happened to BYU last year. I mean, they started out well. They ended up losing, what was it, their last 5 games in a row?
Yeah.
They couldn't stop the run. And the big problem was they had injuries on defense, especially up front. And the drop off between the starting front and then the backups who would come in rotation was big, because it's not just that those guys in rotation now become the starters. Now you've got the third string guys who step up as key rotational guys. And BYU didn't have enough depth, healthy depth, to be able to handle that. And so, it'll take time to develop that. But right now, what they're doing in recruiting has been great. I mean, their focus has been great. The interest from recruits of the kinds, the big body guys, has been great for BYU. So what can they do this year? This year, you mentioned the quarterback situation. That's the first thing that needs to have a really high performance outlook.
Yeah.
Because BYU's got terrific receivers. Moving Keanu Hill from receiver to tight end, great move. He went from being a big, not terribly fast receiver to being a pretty good size, really fast tight end with receiver skills. And so these are good moves. The offensive line, I think, will get better just because of TJ Woods coming in as the offensive line coach, who is, in my opinion, one of the best teachers of the techniques of the game in college football today. Everywhere he's been, his offensive lines have gotten better at the craft of playing offensive line. And BYU's got big guys on the O-line, at least in the front, the starters. They'll need to develop some depth there too. But if the quarterback can pull all that together, I think the offense has a chance to go out and really compete. The defense, they need to get a pass rush, and they need to stay healthy. Bringing in, they got in a transfer from Weber State to rush the passer. They've got some guys that they brought in. Tyler Batty's still there in the D line to rush the passer. The secondary will be fine if they get that pass rush.
Yeah.
But if that pass rush materializes and the big guys stay healthy in rotation, then they've got a chance to hold up against the run and give the offense a chance to go out and win games. So that's a lot of ifs. To boil it down, the quarterback situation, the quarterbacks have to play exceptionally well. The defensive front has to get to the passer. They have to stay healthy, and they have to, limit the run better than they did last year when they started to have injuries. With all that, BYU could finish in the top 3, 4, 5 of the Big 12 with a couple breaks going their way. And so it's really hard for me anyway, to project where BYU could finish here, because there's so many variables. But the ceiling is really high. And I think people need to understand, though, that it takes a while to build up the depth that you need to compete in this kind of a grinding schedule in a Power 4 conference.
Yeah. Philo's going to ask you a question that's fascinating. Before we get to that one, let me ask you this, because now that we're into kind of the season, November 9th, BYU and Utah are together again for the first time as a conference rival since 2010. So it was a long time ago.
That's my senior year.
And you know what? The Utes are projected as the number 1 team, so who knows what's going to be riding on that November 9th game. But BYU is going to go up there with every intention to beat them again, as they did back in 2021, the last time they played. How interested and eager are you for that game back in this kind of a setting in this rivalry?
I can't wait, because rivalry games are what college football is all about, with all the changes in the realignment and NIL and potentially paying players and all the shifts that have happened in college football. It's important to always maintain what makes college football great. And at the top of that list is the rivalries. BYU-Utah is one of the great rivalries of the sport. And, it's interesting in traveling around the country and visiting with jaded broadcasters, guys that have been around for decades. They've seen all the rivalries. If you ask them to name some of their favorites, most of them will include BYU Utah in that because of the passion, and the passion goes deep into generations of families.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that makes college football something that the NFL can't ever be. And so I'm so glad that this is coming back. You know, Utah right now has an edge because they've been in a Power Five conference for a lot of years. BYU is now getting started in it, but I'm glad that this is back, and I can't wait to see what happens in this game.
Here's the interesting thing that you said is that it goes, you know, deep into generations. And I just had flashes of seeing my boys married and having their wives have Utah shirts on, you know, and what would I do? How would I feel about that moment? And, you know, and stuff like that is definitely, you're right. It's something that, you know, can't be copied at the next level. But here's the question that Dave was saying that's interesting. In 1984, prior to your NFL career, you started at center at 6'5", 247 pounds. Connor Pay will start at center next month at 6'5", 315 pounds. The difference there is that kind of crazy when you hear those comparisons?
Yeah, especially in high school. I mean, I played in high school starting center senior year at 207 pounds. Now you've got guys at 300 pounds that bench over 400 in high school.
Crazy.
Right? It's nuts. But it's not necessarily because things are players are better. I mean, the athletes really haven't changed. Athletic skill, if you go back and look way back in the day, look at the athletic skill, it's the same as the athletic skill now. The difference is in strength training, in nutrition, in coaching, that all start much, much, much earlier with a heavier focus on those things than we did back in the day. So those guys have built up that kind of a physical body and football skills in ways that we were way behind. That's why, you know, people say, well, gee, 1984 BYU, would you have beaten the 2006 Florida team? Well, probably not with that. Well, we'd have competed with them, certainly. But if you would have given us the same amount of time from the time we were 8 years old to develop our bodies, then, absolutely. And so that's one of the reasons the difference is there. And as I look at it, it all is relative. It's like, you know, steroids in baseball. I'm not a baseball expert, but it seemed to me that if you've got a pitcher on steroids, throw it to a batter on steroids, okay, that's a wash.
Yep.
Right. And so if you've got a 325-pound offensive lineman blocking against a 325-pound defensive lineman, okay, now who's the better football player? And so that to me is the interesting part.
Well, you anchored one of the greatest offensive lines in school history, arguably the best. And to think that Connor's 68 pounds heavier than you were when he takes the field against Southern Illinois next month, that just screams how the game has changed. But hey, you got your ring. That's what you and your teammates all have a ring as a national champion.
Listen, I hope Connor gets one too before he leaves, at least the conference ring. I mean, that would be wonderful. It would take a lot, but I hope these guys get it. I wish for them to know what we knew back in those days.
What do you want to see in the first possession next month against Southern Illinois when that offensive line comes out on the field after the way the last season ended? Healthier, bigger, stronger, faster, new line coach and all that stuff. First possession for BYU, what do you want to see from those big boys up front?
Finish. In the last 3 or 4 years, I would watch BYU's offensive line, big, strong guys, talented guys, and I'd see him go out there in the first few steps of the play, and then I'd see him kind of just sort of slow it down. And I'm, well, what are you doing? You know, you finish. And so I want to see them go from snap all the way through the whistle with 100% mental and physical focus. And that mental focus is critical. You know, against Southern Illinois, BYU, if they play like they can, they will outmatch them physically top to bottom. But I want to see them finish as if they're playing for the national championship in that game. On the defensive side, you know what I want to see from the big guys up front? I want to see them reestablish the line of scrimmage. I want to see them attack. You know, when I look back at highlights of the 1984 team, I look at our defensive front, after having played 12 years in the NFL and now being a football analyst for, I guess I've been at ESPN for, I don't know, 21 years now.
Yeah.
And so I watch what they do. And those defenders up front were incredibly aggressive, flying across the line, shocking the blockers at the line of scrimmage, resetting that line of scrimmage. And that was the foundation of their success on that side of the ball in those years. And so for the defense, that's what I want to see. I want to see them aggressive, getting behind the line and causing trouble. And I'm wanting to see individual players up front win their pass rush matchups with technique. In other words, yeah, you might be bigger or stronger than the guy you're against. I want to see you throw a move, and if that gets stopped, I want to see a counter off of that move. And I want to see it look like you have a plan. Because too often, guys, especially in college, they'll throw a move and then they don't know what to do if it didn't work. No, you have a plan. You throw your move. If that doesn't work, depending on what the blocker did, you either go to your planned secondary pass rush move, or you go to a secondary move that is enabled because of what the blocker just did to stop your first move. These are things that I want to see. I don't care if BYU beats them 100-0 or if they beat them 10-7. I want to see the individuals execute the craft of their position from a technique standpoint and a finish the play standpoint in that opener.
I think the fans would go for 100-0, Trevor, if the fans were going to vote. But we get the 10-7. A couple more questions for BYU national champion Trevor Matich on the Wise Guys. Next month, the 15-time Emmy Award-winning broadcaster will begin 21st season covering college football on ESPN, and a guy we're all very proud of. The Cougar Board question of the week is here. If you're not familiar with Cougar Board, largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts daily, and Dilbert's got a question from their insider subscribers, Trevor. It's for you on TJ Woods, and you talked a little bit already about your expectation for the offensive line, but with TJ Woods coming in, what do you like about him? How big of a difference maker can he be with that offensive line?
I think he can be everything. I mean, you go back to, I hate to do this, but when we played back in the day, the offensive line coaches were Roger French and Mel Olson. I went on to the NFL, played 12 years for some of the greatest offensive line coaches of their time. Alex Gibbs with the Colts, who went on to the Broncos and won Super Bowls. Jim Hannafin with Washington. Just some of the greatest, Larry Bechtel with the Jets. I mean, these are incredible teachers of the technique, and none of them were better than Roger French and Mel Olson. And once again, when you watch highlights of that year, what you see is amazing technique from a standpoint of footwork, balance, hand placement, and recovery when things break down. And it's all about technique. When you watch the offensive lines of TJ Woods and other places, what you see is them executing the craft, the techniques, in much the same way that we were taught back in the day, and that is a breath of fresh air. I hope that he's able to continue that here. I think he will. I think that's why he was hired. But see, what he also does is teaches to execute the technique with violence, discipline, but violent execution of the proper technique in a disciplined fashion, right? It's one thing to go in there and I got my hands in the right spot, but if you don't shock somebody, it's not going to matter. He's going to overpower you. So the violence has to be added to it, and you cannot allow the violence to diminish the effectiveness of the technique because it makes the technique less sound because you're doing too much and you're being too crazy. So that combination is one of the reasons why when he coached at Wisconsin, I mean, one year out there, they averaged over 300 yards per game rushing with TJ Woods coaching the offensive line. So our offensive line back in the day, Roger French and Mel Olson did not make us more talented than we were. They did not make us better. They did not raise our potential. What they did was raised our capability to match our potential. And all of us were good football players, but we got every possible drop of effectiveness out of our physical potential because of how we were taught to play the game. And that is the way that TJ Woods coaches.
Yeah, that's how you go 13-0.
Right.
Getting that out of your offensive line.
For sure. Well, I mean, going over 300, yards rushing. And as you were saying this, I was going through a question in my head, which is as far as the aggressiveness and like the violence part, because I feel like you have to have that in you as a person. I mean, I just wonder if a coach can get that out of somebody, of a kid who's like soft spoken, kind of sweet, right? Like kind of nice, and versus the kid who's already mean, maybe kind of already a bully. Because I always say I like my offensive linemen and my linebackers to be mean and be bullies, right? Like it just has to be inside of them. So do you think a coach can get that out of a kid, or is it something that the kid already has inside of him?
If he has it inside of him, a good coach will know what buttons to push in order to get it out of him. But how those guys act off the field is never an indicator of how they'll be on the field.
Right.
You get guys that are mean and they mistreat people and they're just bulls in china shops off the field, and you think, okay, on the football field they're going to go get them, and they don't.
Right.
And then you see guys that don't say two words. You say guys that are soft spoken, but when it's time to play, they don't even talk during the game. They play hard, they play with violence. In a lot of ways, I was kind of like that guy because I was very shy during my time at BYU off the field, and I didn't, I was just very shy. And I would go out to the football field, and early for the games, I'd sit in the end zone, in the corner of the end zone, and I'd stretch and I'd just look out at the snow-capped peaks and the blue banners flying in the gaps in the stadium and just take in how beautiful this was. And then from the opposite corner, a couple of opponents would come out and start to get an early warm-up. And I went from really enjoying what's going on and thinking about my assignments and what the defense might do and what calls I would make in pass protection as a center. I went from there to a rage that they dared to show up here. I mean, it was all I could do to not get up and go over there and kick them out of the stadium, right? Throw them out of the stadium.
How can someone so nice and friendly as you do that?
Yeah, never underestimate the threat of a patient man. Just be careful about that. But and I knew at some point that, or on some level, that they had to be there because we were playing a game and they were brought there and we need to play and they can't leave. I knew that, but I was still livid that they had the gall to even show up. And then that would carry me through to the first play.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was very much a technician. And, and I would get, I played with that violence behind the technique, but I wasn't that guy that played with violence instead of technique.
Yeah.
Right. But you never would have guessed that I could have those feelings on the football field if you just knew me outside of football.
Trevor Matich is with us. Belo's got 5 quick questions for you, and we'll get you out of here. Thank you so much for being on the show. Blaine wanted me to ask you one thing. And by the way, Deseret News has got a big production coming together on the 40th anniversary of the national championship team. I had the privilege of writing a story on Trevor. I think it turned out great. Most of it's true. I think you're gonna like it. So that'll be come out later in the summer. But in that championship game, Blaine asked me to ask you if you remember. So he comes in the game. Robbie Bosco's injured, and he comes into the huddle off the sideline, and you and Robert and I are right there, and you say to him, Blaine, we got you. They're not going to touch you at all. And on the first play, he said he got drilled so hard into the ground by one of Michigan's defensive linemen. And he got up and he looked back at you guys again, and you looked at him and you said, starting now. Is that true?
Well, you got to have some fun. I tell you, Blaine Fowler was, if any one individual epitomized what made that 1984 team great, it was Blaine Fowler. Certainly he was one of them. He played meaningful minutes during the season. But Robbie was the quarterback, and everybody knew it. And Blaine never took a step back from the intensity and the focus of his preparation. When it came down to Blaine having to go in, when the quarterback was injured and the national championship is on the line, Blaine Fowler went in and he was ready. It wasn't that, oh no, what do I do now? It wasn't like he wasn't paying attention in the meetings as much, and he didn't play as hard as he could in practice when he got the chance for his reps. He was playing like he was a starter in practice. He was preparing like he was a starter because had starter talent.
Yeah.
It's just that he had a guy in front of him who was third in the Heisman race. But in comes Blaine Fowler now with everything on the line. Michigan has all the momentum. Their fans in the stands are going nuts. You can look across the line and see Michigan's defense smell blood in the water and think, now we're going to take these guys out. We're going to get another turnover. This one we're going to take in for a touchdown. We're going to finish this game right now with the backup quarterback in. And what does Blaine Fowler do? I think he went, what was it, 5 for 7?
Yeah, I think so.
He engineered a drive that quieted the crowd, that put their defense on their heels, that allowed our defense on the sideline to rest. And that was critical because not Blaine, but the rest of the offense, we had 6 turnovers in that game, and our defense was getting a little tired. Blaine allowed them to rest. And when Robbie came back, Blaine turned the offense back over to him in a good position with the momentum that Michigan thought they had by knocking our starting quarterback out, completely obliterated. And Robbie took back over. Blaine Fowler, in preparing all year for that critical moment, is, I think, one of the best examples of why that team did what it did.
That team won, and because of it, for 21 years, every single time you're introduced on ESPN, the word national champion is ahead of you. And I know that has meant so much to you. I mean, as it should.
Yeah, it does, because they can never take it away. I mean, we knew when that final gun sounded in San Diego, and we were undefeated. We didn't know we'd be national champions yet, but we knew that we were undefeated. There were other bowl games that had to be played out before the final polls came out. But then those polls came out. They ranked us number 1, and all the major polls, I believe, had us number 1, especially the 2 biggest ones, the writers' poll and the coaches' poll. And we knew at that time that no matter what happened for the rest of our lives, our brotherhood would have that to share. And when we get back together, as we did this summer, sometimes we haven't seen each other for many years. We get back together, it's like we've never been apart. That love, that brotherhood is always there. And I will tell you this, that I get introduced on the air as BYU national champion Trevor Matich. But when anybody mentions to me or asks me, hey, you won the national championship, right? I never say, yes, I did, ever. I always say, yes, I was part of a team that won the national championship. I never say I won the national championship. I never say, hey, when I won the national championship, it felt like this. Ever. When we won the national championship, because that's the way it is. You know what? When the final gun sounded in San Diego after we beat Michigan, the first people I went to see were not the quarterback, the coach. I went to see the scout.
Hey, you're cutting into my story now. Come on.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, come on. That's for the readers. That hasn't come out yet.
Okay. Well, then I won't say what I said to him then. I can let the point is that everybody contributed. Everybody contributed.
Yeah. Yeah, what a great time. I was sitting in the stands cheering for the Cougs, 1984. All right, Belo's got 5 questions, and then you could go explain to Dana why we took so long. So sorry about that, but it's been great having you on the show.
He's right over there, by the way.
Hey, Dana.
And this is rapid fire 2-minute drill. First answer that comes to your mind, go ahead and spit it out. So question 1 is favorite sports movie.
Major League.
Major League. I could have swore Revenge of the Titans was about to come out of your mouth, but you froze
Major
it
League.
And came back with Major League. Awesome. Okay.
Number 2, favorite singer or band?
Dan Fogelberg, because of his songwriting and the way he told his stories through his singing.
Okay. Dan Fogelberg. Well, I'll tell you, in 2.5 years, that's the first Dan Fogelberg. But I get it. He was great.
But my mission going forward is to bring him back to the world.
All right.
Number 3, favorite breakfast cereal.
Oh, Honey Nut Cheerios. Are you kidding?
Honey Nut.
I've never heard that one. Yeah.
Really? Honey Nut Cheerios, yeah.
That's a good one.
Cameron Martin's over taking notes because he's going to get questions just like this in a minute.
Yeah, don't cheat. Okay, number 4, favorite BYU moment.
Favorite BYU moment was when BYU's basketball team was playing Notre Dame. I think they made it to the Elite Eight. They needed a score at the end. Danny Ainge took a handoff after Notre Dame had scored under Notre Dame's basket. And Danny Ainge dribbled that ball through all 5 Notre Dame defenders and laid it in for the game-winning points as time expired. I was in the Missionary Training Center, and that one game, they let us watch that game.
Nice.
And we went nuts. That, to me, is my favorite BYU moment.
That's awesome. I'm glad they let you watch that game, as they should.
Yeah, I'm surprised they did, but you know what? We'd have been miserable if they didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. Favorite ESPN moment?
Yeah, this is an ESPN moment.
Oh. Favorite ESPN moment? You mean of mine or just watching ESPN?
Let's go with yours because you've been there for a long time. So, and folks should know also that Pitt game was on ESPN, the first college football game. So that too could also qualify as an ESPN moment for you.
Then that would be it.
But as a broadcaster, take us into your world of it. What's been the funnest as an ESPN broadcaster? What stands out?
You know what? I'll give you 2.
Okay.
One of them was Wisconsin had come to play at Cincinnati. Ron Dane was their running back. Cincinnati knocked him off. And, you know, when that game ended, the play-by-play guy just went nuts and then was quiet. And we just sat back as broadcasters and let the director do the work. Camera shot, camera shot, camera shot. You know, crowd going nuts. Players in tears. Coaches hugging, back to the crowd, back to Wisconsin fans in disbelief, back to players in tears. It was just my favorite moment that I've ever been associated with at ESPN was one where I wasn't talking at all because of the importance of that moment to the Cincinnati fan base and team, and the fact that we just let it breathe.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. What's the other one?
Oh, well, the other one's kind of self-serving.
That's okay.
Florida won the national championship. I think it was against Oklahoma. And Tim Tebow, they lost to Ole Miss, and Tim Tebow gave his speech. There will never be anyone that will work as hard as we will, you know. And they put that in a plaque up on their stadium. And after I was doing pregame, halftime, and postgame for ESPN Radio, was down on the field for the game. And by the way, I've done that for most of the time I've been there. It's tremendous fun. Afterwards, I went up to do postgame with Brett Musburger in the booth, and I referenced that speech, and I talked about how that speech turned everything around. And as I was saying it, I was thinking, dang, I worded that pretty well. And then Brett Musburger just looked at me and he said, this is live on the air now. He said, "You're really good." And I was like, whoa, Brett Musburger just said that on the air. And idiot me, I didn't immediately after the show go to the producers and say, I need a copy of that.
Oh, yeah.
Come
on.
But that's sort of the self-serving thing.
That's awesome.
But it was a moment where I got a compliment from a legendary broadcaster that made me feel really good.
Well, you deserve a lot of those. We look forward to watching you all season long representing BYU, both as a student, as a graduate, as a national champion, and as one of our friends who's in the big time at ESPN. Give our best to Dana. We'll talk soon. Trevor, thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
The great Trevor Matich.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
He's big time. And we appreciate him giving us his time here tonight.